experienced leadership is not a bad thing, especially if you understand and want to action what is wrong with Ontario and with governments, and how do we fix it.
The mood of the province is a population that's absolutely had it with change. They're worn out. They've been through so much over the space of the last couple of years that they just want things to settle down.
If we're going to continuously dwell in the past and blame individuals for decisions that were made, we're not going to come together and figure out the future.
From the Zoomerplex in historic Liberty Village, the Zoomer with Libby Znaimer.
Welcome to the Zoomer. I'm Libby Znaimer. With just days to go before the Ontario election, we take a look at what issues are top of mind at this stage of the campaign and where the leaders sit in the polls, plus just how committed are Ontarians to the parties they say they will support, and how likely are they to drift to other parties before Election Day. But before we dive in, let's tee up the topic.
In 2018, Doug Ford's PCs won a 76-seat majority, ending 15 years of Liberal rule. 4 years later, voters are headed back to the polls. As things stand, Ontario's PCs are likely to win most seats and Doug Ford to be re-elected Premier. Meanwhile, some polls have placed Stephen Del Duca's Liberals in second place. Good news for a party that was reduced to 7 seats in the last election. Despite 2 years of his term under COVID, the pandemic response isn't as big an issue for voters as healthcare and cost of living. But the question remains, are these the issues that will really drive people to the polls?
I want to start by rolling a piece of tape from the Ontario election debate.
Your record on public education, Mr. Ford, is an embarrassment, and you should be ashamed of yourself.
You want to talk about embarrassment?
Yeah,
you destroyed this province in every
let's
area, no
talk
matter
about that
the
for a quick
economy,
second.
hospitals, long-term care.
if I might.
You destroyed this province by the NDP.
Oh, you'd love to leave all that stuff in the rear view mirror.
There are
But
new
I'm sorry,
challenges
you left
facing
a wreck
people.
behind you,
Listen,
and you have to step up and
but
take some
listen,
responsibility
there
for
are
that,
new
Mr. Del
challenges.
Duca.
There are new.
So was the debate as critical as everyone predicted? There wasn't really a knockout punch, and what really struck me was that Doug Ford, the progressive conservative leader, spent a lot of time attacking the Liberals, attacking Stephen Del Duca. They don't even have party status. They were trounced in the previous election, and who knows if he'll even be reelected. What was that about, Lisa?
Well, I think what it always comes down to, Libby, is you need to show contrast. You need to show voters that there's a difference between you and a difference between the other parties. So the Premier just can't sit there, or the leader of the Progressive Conservatives just can't sit there and be attacked the whole time. He has to make a case as to why he's different from the other leaders. And that's what he was attempting to do in those clips, just reminding people what the other records were, what their track is, and what his is, because contrast is what's going to fuel people to get to the polls and cast their vote.
Charles, did you take that as a good sign that he was picking on the Liberals as opposed to the NDP, which are the official opposition?
Well, I thought they all performed well. And to your point, there was no home run, there was no knockout punch. But it's very telling that they're attacking Stephen Del Duca. He's rising in the polls. Even as of this week, he's improved dramatically. And it's somewhat flattering that they're concerned so much about Stephen and the Liberal Party because many of the things they're implementing were already in place when we left. We actually engaged in those very issues. So I think it's a positive sign that Stephen is being targeted, not only by the Conservatives, but even by the NDP.
Well, speaking of the NDP, so some people were saying they felt that in these exchanges and mutual attacks between the Liberals and the Progressive Conservatives that the NDP, Andrea Horwath, got kind of lost in there, and she's the official opposition.
Look, what I saw there are a couple of things. One, as Andrea has frequently pointed out, they broke it. They, as in the Liberals, for 15 years, and Doug Ford for the last 4. They broke it. She's prepared to fix it. And part of that is reminding voters who might have forgotten a couple of things during the pandemic, that the Liberals had closed 600 schools across the province, in particular in the north. They also fired 1,600 nurses. They did not do the investments in infrastructure, in healthcare, in schools, in long-term care. There's a reason that Doug Ford got to talk about needing to put an iron ring around long-term care, because it hadn't been invested for 20 years plus. The reality is, unfortunately, during the pandemic, as we know, that the only line around long-term care was the lineup of hearses to try to get into them.
Daryl, does this emphasis on 4 years ago, is that something that resonates with voters?
I think in the case of Stephen Del Duca, it may very well. But I mean, just to get back to the question that you asked before, because it's absolutely the right question, why did Doug Ford focus on Stephen Del Duca? Well, it's simple. The Liberal Party, if you look at the numbers in Ontario, the Conservatives have roughly around 40. That's their ceiling. The Liberals and the NDP, between the two of them, have about 60. So the question is whether or not either party has a higher ceiling. So which party could go higher and actually potentially damage the progressive Conservatives' chances of getting reelected? And the answer is the Liberal Party. They tend to be the default vote for whatever the side is going to be. The NDP tends to be a third choice. We didn't see that in the last election, but you can tell that the Tories have done their polling. They understand that the person who probably has a higher ceiling in this race is not Andrea Horwath in the NDP. It's probably the Liberal Party, because people know less about them, the brand is compelling for a lot of people in the province. So I think what they were doing was just making sure that the division that currently exists between the Liberals and the NDP, when they each get 30s, the Conservatives win, that doesn't get toppled over or compromised. So I think that's why he was doing what he was doing.
Does any of this calculus go into CARP's calculations?
Well, when we're talking to our members and polling them on their pre-election thoughts and after the second week, they're running much closer than the polls. So we're seeing about 30% each right now amongst the CARP members in Ontario. And I would just say that I think Doug Ford's focusing on the Liberals because while the Liberals were reduced to 7 seats, they lost a number of very close races, especially in the Greater Toronto area. So there's room for moving on in both directions, I think, and that's why they're the target.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more of the Zoomer. Welcome back. CARP has its own platform that it introduced called the CARP 5, which includes just 5 key asks: fund better home care, transform long-term care, drastically cut healthcare wait times, make vaccines more accessible, and fund better fitness choices for seniors. Anthony, how do the parties stack up in terms of these asks?
Well, I think for the first time in recent memory, they're actually talking about these issues, which is heartening for our members. During the debate, unfortunately, a lot of those issues were sort of flyover topics, focusing more on who owns the long-term care homes rather than the services provided in them. And that's our big ask, is ensuring that there's a transformation in the forms of care, in the emotion-based care rather than task-based care. Now, we don't really concern ourselves with who owns the homes. We just want the service to be delivered in a dignified manner.
Lisa, you're a caregiver and an advocate. Your husband has young onset Alzheimer's. So from your point of view, how do the Progressive Conservatives stack up with their platform for long-term care?
Yeah, I know I'm supposed to be supportive of all the parties. I'm not going to be much of a helpful partisan on this one because it is a personal issue for me, Libby. And what I would say is this, is that I think it's great that the Progressive Conservatives are announcing that they want to go and build more spaces and that they have built more spaces. And I do see evidence of that. But the issue also has to be viewed from the lens of what is really happening inside in terms of staffing, in terms of training, and are we doing the best that we possibly can with the resources we have? Because I'm cognizant, listen, we could spend all of our tax dollars in long-term homes. We really could. That's how much how much effort goes into having people in places where they're getting the care that is needed, or the total care that they would want to have, because everybody wants to have, you know, one-on-one care 24/7, and we can't afford that. Nobody can afford that. That's why people are going into long-term homes, because we can't afford to do that at home. So I look for innovation. I look for recognition of issues. I think that the Conservatives are approaching it from a capital building point of view, but everybody has to view it as well from a provision of services and a rationalization of what services should be provided. This has to be something I would be happier to see from every party to commit to looking at this on a very serious basis than I would them coming up with a plan, because I'm not convinced anybody understands what exactly has to happen here.
Charles, you are involved with building a long-term care center attached to a community center. So how do you see this, and how do you see what the Liberals are saying?
I think we all agree that it needs to be revolutionized, and frankly, all consecutive governments have had some issues with long-term care. We haven't invested in done what was appropriate. In the last budget that I presented, we provided for more infrastructure and more dollars towards it. But to the point made by Lisa, we need to be more concerned about the service and the ability. And so what I'm doing in our long-term care home affordable housing complex is finding a means to provide services and programs for the broader community, so we can facilitate and be a service for home care as well, using our location as a beacon to do other things in the city of Toronto. And it's unique in that it's a stacked construction where we do have a number of services being provided and allowing some dignity to those that are going to be infirmed. So there's going to be a continuum of care that we're trying to provide, and after-school programs, and enable active seniors and those that are in critical need to have, you know, in our case, we're having a cultural specific home, so they speak in their languages and they have their ability to integrate with others. But I think we all agree that we need to do better. And we don't want to politicize it as mentioned, but there were very critical issues that were highlighted as a result of COVID. We can't have them imprisoned, and that's how they felt.
But we don't want the conversation focused just on who owns them, but really on transforming that care.
But the question of who owns them is coming up. So, Charles, just the kind of a yes or no, almost yes or no answer. Stephen Del Duca is promising to get rid of for-profit home care. Do you think that's a solution?
I think the majority of people want that. It's a matter of how do you get to that.
Daryl, the carnage in long-term care over COVID was unfathomable. It was top of mind for people. It looked like it was going to be a key election issue. At this point, I'm not so sure.
No, it's not. This isn't an issues-driven campaign. This is a campaign, because if it was, the NDP would be winning. I mean, the number one issue in the province is healthcare. They're seen as being best on healthcare by a fairly wide margin. You would think that they would be winning as a result, and they're not. And the reason is the mood of the province. And the mood of the province is a population that's absolutely had it with change. They're worn out. They've been through so much over the space of the last couple of years that they just want things to settle down. And Doug Ford and the Progressive Conservatives are taking advantage of it. But can I just add one thing on the long-term care issue? I mean, what we saw in COVID was tragic, but it's nothing compared to what's coming. I mean, anybody who really takes a look at the demography of what's going on in Canada, and I spend a lot of time writing about this, it's one of my favorite topics. The fastest growing population in Canada is our elderly population. We've stopped having kids. You can mark it on your calendar, and the worst part about this, it's coming at us. We can absolutely know it's coming. 2030, the entire baby boom, not just in Canada, but worldwide, is going to be 65 years of age or older. And the acceleration of the aging of the population is going to go on for 2 decades at like a Formula One pace. And nobody is talking about it in any serious way.
And the conversations sound like these people are coming from outer space. They're the 65-year-olds right now.
They're here. They're here. But it's the fastest growing part of the population. And, you know, honestly, I mean, private sector, public sector, the fact of the matter is nobody's really preparing for this. It's going to be the single biggest issue that's going to confront everything in this country. I mean, we talk about climate change, we talk about other things. These are projective as to what's going to be happening. This one, you can mark it on the calendar, you know when it's going to be happening. Yeah. So everybody needs to be on this.
And are people listening, Anthony?
They're not listening, and I'll ask perhaps the former finance minister who has to make decisions, but we just see things getting kicked further and further down the road, and the province blames the feds, and the feds blame the provinces.
And the province blames the previous government.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Anthony. Yeah. When we come back, Dr. Doris Greenspoon of the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario joins the panel.
We're also paying for the nurses' tuition fees and for their books if they serve in underserved areas. We're taking care of them. We made sure the nurses got a $5,000 retention pay, which is, on the average, 7.6% increase. We've given the PSWs $3 permanent increase, and that far exceeds what your government did, Mr. Del Duca, propped up by the NDP.
Mr. Ford, have you talked to a nurse lately? Have you talked to a nurse about how disrespected they feel, how overworked and underpaid and underappreciated they are, how insulted they feel being called heroes and then essentially having their wages cut by having them frozen? Mr. Ford, if you want to build capacity in our healthcare system, you have to make sure you invest in the people who deliver that care.
Welcome back. Well, that retort from Green Party leader Mike Schreiner was one of the highlights of the debate. And joining the panel is Dr. Doris Greenspoon, Chief Executive Officer of the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Great to see you, Libby.
Well, like I said, that was a highlight of the debate. So what do you say to all the things that Doug Ford says he's doing for nurses?
Some of the programs that Mr. Ford mentioned, first of all, they're all real. So that's number one. Number two, you may be pleased, you may not remember, but you may be pleased to know that some started actually under the leadership of Dalton McGuinty. What is happening and is real is that they're expanding some of those programs. So what it says we are paying for the books of nurses. Yes, the tuition reimbursement program, which exists for several years, is being expanded. What needs to happen, though, is Bill 124, number one. That bill needs to go, and the Premier knows that we have said it ongoingly from day 2 of the pandemic. It's a bill that started pre-pandemic, but the moment that pandemic started needed to go to bring hope, basically, and that there will be light. No one knew how long the pandemic will be, but light at the end of the tunnel. The other thing, Libby, there is 26,000 nurses, internationally educated, living in Ontario as we speak, 26,000 that are eager to join the workforce. And I know the platforms, all 4 of them. We need even more serious commitments that would have been made about language and other issues that will be tackled easier. There needs to be a mandate to the regulatory bodies, and I would suggest this is not only to nursing, it's other regulatory bodies, of a year where they need to fix the processes.
And Kim, Andrea Horwath is seen as the person most likely to fix healthcare. Healthcare is cited as the biggest issue by the most people, so why isn't she doing better?
So she is doing really well in a lot of places, and they may not yet show up in Daryl's polling, but what we're seeing is on the ground. People are understanding the lived experiences they've had. It's great when we talk about infrastructure and beds. Those beds need to have the support staff with them, and those are conversations that need to be had. The other part of that, Libby, is the mental health supports that are necessary, the local community supports for mental health. If you can't access those services, you're going to continue to self-medicate and get into a bigger situation. We saw the other night during the debate, Andrea Horwath talked about the young man from Paris, Ontario, who couldn't get mental health support as a child, couldn't get them as a teen, couldn't get them as a young adult, and tried to take his own life. That story is not unique to that young man, but it is something that could have been and should have been done, taken care of during the successive governments. You need to make sure that people can pay for health care and long-term care with their OHIP card and not their credit card. When my father was in long-term care a few years back, it cost more than my apartment in downtown Toronto. It wasn't some bells and whistles fancy place. He certainly didn't get the care that I would have expected for that cost. We see this in mental health in particular. You know, if people can't pay with their OHIP card, they know that they may not get the service locally, but even worse than that, their employers might take it out on them. This is why when Andrea talks about her program and her system, it is about making sure people pay with their OHIP card, not their credit card.
Lisa, what's your view of this?
I agree completely that we need to do something about credentialing. And from an economic growth perspective, it's for the betterment of everybody that we have folks who have decided to come to this province in order to have a wonderful life and to work and to contribute to society, and they're not allowed to because of credential issues. So I would very much like to see all parties put forward a strong plan on how to fix this issue, and it has to be fixed across the country, quite frankly, as well.
Well, yeah, but again, it seems to me the impediment are the gatekeepers, the colleges.
I was the minister responsible for some of that accreditation when I was in the Minister of Citizenship and Immigration. And very much so, the colleges do prohibit some of those very issues that we want, and it takes them a lot of time to get the accreditation over re-education and certifying themselves. But it's necessary that we move ahead and facilitate some of that, because to the point being made, we're going to be in a tsunami. We're going to need a lot of elder care professionals to support the demand. And I take exception when I hear that we fired 1,600 nurses, when in fact they were just rehired and there was just a union issue and we hired more nurses in the end. We need to hire a lot more going forward, and a lot more PSWs to service that they need, and they need to be trained. So it has to start now. We got to start our education system now to attract them and pay them accordingly to make it an attractive career, because right now it isn't, and it's very tasking for them.
Yeah. Daryl, is this just more of the same, where people give lip service, they say healthcare is the most important thing to me, but when it comes down to it, maybe not? And I also think possibly that for people who aren't completely engaged, it's confusing. Like, how do you tell among the platforms? You know, everybody says they're doing the right thing.
Well, that's because healthcare tends to be a bit of a default response. Everybody's concerned about healthcare. So when you ask people what's the most important issue facing the province that you want the political leaders talking about, they'll say healthcare. But generally what it is an unfocused concern about what the status of the system is going to be in the future, particularly when people need it. The actual specific elements of what is involved in making that better, it tends to get reduced to a lot of technical things. I always like to hear, thousands of nurses and millions of dollars. Nobody knows thousands and millions. I mean, it's like, how is my health care service personally going to be affected? How is that going to change? And the parties, I think, they try to do a good job of communicating on this, but they're not very good at it. And if the parties aren't particularly great, government's even worse. Because it's always in terms of billions and millions and hundreds, and it's like, after a while I just lose track of what's going on. But if you want to know what people say when they're talking about healthcare, it's generally not their specific experience with the system, because they like their doctors when they have access to them. They like the care generally that they get when they encounter the healthcare system, particularly in emergency situations. But what they're really concerned about is whether or not this system is going to be able to maintain itself into the future. And by the way, none of the three parties are seen as having absolutely the best answer on this. At some point, we'll probably be able to turn it into a partisan debate, but right now what it serves on in political terms is, the overall public is concerned about this. They don't know how to vote on it, but what they do is they move down to other issues further down the agenda where they do have a more precise view of who has maybe a very specific plan or can meet a more immediate need. Things like affordability, housing, those kinds of things tend to have more of a partisan bite to them than healthcare does.
That's what that makes a lot of sense to me. We'll be right back with more of theZoomer. Welcome back. Although Ontario's PCs have a strong lead so close to Election Day, a Conservative win is not necessarily inevitable. So what are the various scenarios that could play out over the next days? And I have a question about union support. So the big unions, some of them are supporting Andrea Horwath. But this time, we have construction unions supporting the PCs, supporting Doug Ford. So is that a blow? How significant is it? And are these union members actually going to vote according to these endorsements?
Well, so Liuna endorsed Doug Ford in the last election, and some of the others that we've seen, they were part of what was called the Working Families Coalition, which, surprise, surprise, was a group of unions that were put together by one Stephen Del Duca to go out and combat the Conservatives. So that coalition had certainly fallen apart. Where Andrea Horwath still has a lot of support across the labour movement, the Ontario Federation of Labour, the steelworkers, OPSU, OSSTF members, nurses, doctors. Like, the reality is that she not only understands academically the life of working people, she has certainly seen their lived experience, but she's also witnessed it firsthand. And that sort of authenticity, that connection with people really has served her well as leader. I know lots of people want to ruffle feathers, oh, this is her whatever campaign of this. The reality is we need experience. Experienced leadership is not a bad thing, especially if you understand and want to action what is wrong with Ontario and with governments, and how do we fix it? And that's where Andrea is catching traction.
Daryl, how significant are these endorsements for the Progressive Conservatives, and are those workers actually going to vote according to those endorsements?
I think Kim nailed it. I mean, it was she's absolutely correct. It's not that there's so much that they're endorsing the Conservatives, it's that they're not attacking them. And working families was an incredibly important factor in several election campaigns over the last few cycles. That they're not out there doing what they did is basically good for the Progressive Conservatives and Doug Ford, and that some of them are even endorsing him, even better for him. The truth is, the union endorsements, I think in this circumstance they matter that way. But we were joking off air about round up the usual suspects. I mean, wouldn't you expect most of the unions to endorse the NDP? Of course. But where it becomes really important is in some of those big labor towns where union organizations are still incredibly important, particularly in what is going to be a low turnout election, which this one is very likely to be. And I think also in places where progressive candidates are really squaring off and Conservatives really aren't a factor. So places like even downtown Toronto, I think the endorsement and support of the unions in a low turnout election could be incredibly important to flip some of those seats, actually to hold on to some of those seats that the Liberals are trying to flip in this election campaign. So good for Andrea that she got them, but also good for Doug.
Lisa, what about those union endorsements? I know that workers have called into my show and they say, hey, I work in construction and he's building the 413, which a lot of people really hate and will vote against, but it's a bread and butter thing for them.
It is true, and it's not just Highway 413 that's going to get built. It is all the infrastructure that needs to be built in order for energy transition to net zero to actually come into play for Ontario and for the country. That is it's a massive amount of construction that's going to need even decarbonization of buildings. That's going to take building trades, and that's going to take specific skills that we have. So yes, I think it's a really good sign for the Progressive Conservatives to have those endorsements. Now, will that trickle down into the ballot box? I don't know. Perhaps not. But I still think it is very buoyant for that party to have those kinds of endorsements.
Doris, nurses. Are nurses united in how they vote?
So first of all, I'm not aware of nursing organizations that have endorsed any party. So let me clarify that. Not as far as I know, now or RNO, certainly not. Never we have. It's not just not now, or not the RPNs or others. What we do is we actually support policies. And we put our platform, much like CARP does, our platform on environmental determinants of health, social determinants of health, nursing human resources, health system transformation, which is critical because needs to happen, because you spoke in the first segment about nursing homes for the elderly. How about home care for the elderly? How about people want to stay in their homes? And you guys have not discussed this piece, but every single party has committed to putting money into home care. Critical for Elisa. When Lisa, I was heartbroken and enamored when you were sharing at the beginning, because if Lisa had had at the time accessible home care in a very different way with the expertise necessary, it would have been a very different experience for Lisa, her husband, and the kids. So those are the pieces that nurses actually put policies forward, and now we will pay for it.
Okay, we'll get to your questions after the break. Welcome back. Let's get to some of your questions. And our first question comes by email from Ian. And it reads, in the last election, the big issue was hydro rates. No one seems to be talking about that this time. Why? Daryl.
Well, this is a really great example and a good question, a good memory too. Of what we were talking about before, Libby, where in fact, when you went out and surveyed people in the last election campaign, they still told you healthcare was the most important issue. But again, they had to go down to something that had more partisan bite, which was hydro rates. And even Premier Wynne, after the election, much further after the election, mentioned that was the issue that basically defeated the Liberal Party. The Conservatives aren't dealing with it right now. It's not as big an issue. It's really moved down in terms of level of priority and relative to what Ontarians are thinking about in this election campaign, and is probably, I would say, has been replaced by housing. That's the issue that's come up and filled the spot that hydro rates filled the last time around. So I think that's what's happening in terms of public opinion.
I got to tell you, in terms of callers to my show, I get callers who are still really mad about the privatization.
We tried to remonetize our hydro so as to lower rates over that period of time, because we spent a lot of money to decarbonize the system and get rid of coal plants. And so what we were trying to do is remonetize and lower rates thereafter. They fought us on that issue. They ran on the fact that hydro rates are going up. And when you come to Hydro One, we had a system that was totally broken. People think we're selling Niagara Falls or selling power plants. That wasn't the case. It was just a distribution. And we still owned over 50% of the company after we did it, because we did it in stages. We have a much better run company, but it wasn't popular. But we're making more money at it. We have greater dividends. And Doug Ford, who prides himself on being the businessman, came in there, put his hands into this public company, screwed it up, and we cost ourselves about $300 million more. And Bay Street, who are all business, were looking at him saying, what are you doing? This thing is actually much better run than it was before. And it's still the case. It's unfortunate that we're not talking about this. And what's the reality is hydro rates are going up.
Yeah, they
under
are.
his watch, when he said he was going to actually lower them.
Yep.
And people aren't holding him to account.
Okay. Our next question comes from Janine in our live audience. Hello, Janine.
Hi, Libby. How are you?
Fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, my question is about the long wait times. The pandemic caused a lot of backlog, but the wait times are still there, and a lot wasn't mentioned a lot at the debate on Monday. So I was wondering who's going to be the better one to choose to reduce the wait times and reduce the hallway health.
Do you want to take that, Doris?
Sure.
There's a lack of nurses is a big problem.
Sure, but I love how Ms. Janine started by the hallway nursing. It's not always healthcare, it's always nursing, because nurses are the ones that attend to people in the hallways. You may remember the Premier ran with that.
Yes, that was a big...
But the Premier didn't know we will have a pandemic. None of us knew. So the only way, Janine, I'm sorry to tell you about this, to fix the issue of the catastrophic wait times, because that's how it's now actually worded, is to bring more RNs. And I am saying specifically RNs, and again, I will insist that it's about 14,000 of the 26,000 waiting in Ontario that want to work, of the INs, that could be in a matter of months if they were processed. You need them for this. You need them for the surgeries. You need them for the ICUs. You cannot put anybody but an RN. You need them for the step-down units. You cannot do without the rents. You need them to discharge people faster to home so that the first couple of visits is an RN, and then you can triage to others, including all the way to RPNs, PSWs. But without RNs, there is a bottleneck. And for the first time, I need to tell you in my career, and I have worked a long career in 4 countries, I am more preoccupied than ever. Not for nurses, because nurses will find work. There are less, so they will find work, but for patients. For patients, for Canadians, for Ontarians, because the crisis is around the world, it's not only here.
And look, I'll say Andrea Horwath is already committed to that, but more than that, you started with the Premier promised this going into the last election to end hallway medicine, because it's a lovely bumper sticker. But he didn't do it. He didn't do anything about that in the first 2 years. And then we had the pandemic. Wouldn't it have been wonderful had the work that should have been done to hire those nurses, to get the accreditation up, to actually do the announcements and the real work to transforming healthcare and the Ministry of Health and home care? Have you done those real work? That wouldn't have been nearly the challenge that we faced during the pandemic.
There was some tinkering. And I would like to know how much actually got done, but there was tinkering. Remember, they reorganized. There are these Ontario health teams. Some of it, I know with home care, I say they just changed the names of things.
They changed the names and they gutted public health across Ontario. That was actually one of the things that happened. The other thing is, and I love that we've, all got our, car rebate checks, but that took $1 billion out of the Ontario Treasury. How much we could have done for children with autism that wasn't being funded, that the Conservatives ran on the last campaign and made worse. And Lisa MacLeod, the minister of the time, saying, well, just give them an iPad. I'm sorry, that is not what you ran on. That is not what is needed. And when we have challenges like this, oftentimes, whether it is in home care or autism or any other thing, they end up in hospital. And that causes an additional backlog. And these challenges need to be addressed, not just bumper stickers.
Our last question is from Julia. She writes, every party seems to be talking about long-term care, but no one has given a proper accounting of the full scope of the problem and how long it will take to fix. So who do you have faith in to actually fix the problem? Lisa, you started by saying you were not partisan, so can you answer that?
On this topic? The fix for long-term health care, well, there is no time frame for it, first of all, because we have no idea of what we're going to be looking at. And while I do appreciate that a lot of seniors want to age in place, I have to underline once again that dementia is a very different beast. And we have to take that into account as we figure out what the future policy is going to look like for long-term care. And I'm going to put out there that I think that how we view long-term care right now is actually short-sighted, because I think what is going to matter going into the future is something that we actually haven't even grappled with now. And I'm at the cutting edge of very fit and healthy individuals having dementia and just simply being unable to be at home, even with healthcare, home care coming into the house. They simply cannot be there because of the danger it is for the family around them. I don't think any party has grappled with that issue. I don't think society has grappled with that issue. So what I'm looking for is a party that's going to be flexible, that's going to understand the issue, and that's going to have smart people involved, and that includes getting everybody involved. So I don't know if there's a perfect answer to it. I'm glad we're discussing it, but I can tell you one thing. If we're going to continuously dwell in the past and blame individuals for decisions that were made, we're not going to come together and figure out the future. I care about the future. I really do care about what happened, but that's something we will get to and we will understand it as part of our historical analysis. What I care about is people getting their minds around what's coming down the pipe, not what's happened before, and using it as a way to beat other people up.
From your lips to Doug Ford's ears. So
I agree.
When we come back, final thoughts from our panelists. That's next. Welcome back to theZoomer. It's now time for final thoughts from our panelists, starting to my left with Daryl.
Well, taking a look at public opinion right now, it looks like the Conservatives are looking pretty good. It's really a battle over who's in second or third, and we're going to be seeing a lot of polling over the next few days, and you'll have a pretty good sense of what's going on.
What I will always say is you have to show up. If you want change, even if you want status quo, but if you want change, you actually have to show up. This isn't like being a Leaf fan where you can cheer from the sidelines. You can actually show up. You can actually make change, and you do that by voting.
Charles.
You know, this is an emotional piece as well, because you're trying to look at who you trust. And oftentimes in politics, it comes down to that. There's a lot of policies that could be discussed, and of course, we've seen a lot of slogans being thrown around, certainly by the Ford government, and in the past and to this very day. But you want someone who's decisive, who can make a difference, who can stand up for you. And I think people are going to want to look at who can they trust.
Doris.
So I think for the public, I will speak more than anything, go to our NEO platform and see what we are recommending. We are recommending how to tackle poverty. You cannot be healthy if you are poor. We are recommending how to tackle the environment. Without a healthy environment, there is no world. We are recommending what to do with human resources very clearly, and commissions have adopted that, so it obviously is very evidence-based. We are recommending also how the health system needs to continue with health system transformation and integrated systems of care and accelerate them, because that's good for Ontarians. And we are recommending within that home care is a must, long-term care is a must, not only hospital care. And then, of course, how we will pay, and we always say progressive taxation, because then the poor pays almost nothing and the rich pays more. Simple as that.
Lisa.
Yeah, and on that note, I think what's important in this election, and maybe we'll start hearing about in the next 2 weeks, is we spent a lot of time talking about where we'd like to deploy resources, where we'd like to see more spending, who should get more money, why we need to have more nurses, more teachers, more spots. But what we also have to talk about is how we're going to pay for all of this, and that includes economic growth and economic generation. And I think in the last 2 weeks, we're going to have to hear from all the parties. What are their plans for economic growth for Ontario, and how are we going to pay for the things that we all desire?
Thank you for being with us. Whether you think it's time for change or not, the outcome of this election will have an impact on your life. So please make sure you get out and vote. Thank you so much to our panelists. We'll see you all soon. It's time to zoom out.